of like when you converse with someone that has such a wealth of experience and timing, it's kind of like, okay, where do you start? But I'm curious, like, so I'll just do it like, if we're looking at television in SA,
Yeah.
like right now, are we okay?
Yeah, I think we are. I think there are a lot of very talented people working in television. And I think that just because such a sort of volume of television has been made, that people are honing their skills. So I think things begin to look better than they did, and I think the understanding of narrative needs, I think people are becoming more proficient at that. But I mean, what is happening in South Africa, though, is that the budgets are getting smaller and smaller.
You're right.
So fundamentally what that means is that you have to make the television faster and faster. So I find myself in a situation where I sort of, I employ directors that work on our shows, and I don't ever envy them. I don't ever feel like, oh, I wish I was directing, because the thing of directing such volumes in a day feels hard, and it's quite a trick to craft something when you're making it that quickly. So, if I go back to Yizo Yizo, we spent a year developing those first 13 scripts, most of which was done and spent in research and all of that sort of thing. And that kind of luxury feels very remote now.
You can't do that now. Everything is much quicker.
Yeah, it's like, can we have the show ready in 2 months? Can you start shooting in 2 months' time, so you're shooting and you're writing at the same time? So I'm sure one's honing one's skills through practice, but I suppose, I think the problem with it is that you're simply trying to get done what has to be done, and there isn't much space for exploration.
Right.
So, for example, I mean, the tradition of the television that we make was largely with investing a huge amount in the actors and saying to the actors, leaving them to improvise, which often you would find magic through that improvisation process.
True.
But it takes longer, and of course to edit it takes much longer, because you're trying to, improvisations sometimes, the scene had a particular narrative and the improvisation has taken it somewhere else, and then you have to, in the edit, decide, do I want to take it back to where it was, or shall I go in the direction that the actor's taken it?
Yeah.
So, that was all exciting for me back then, and now we find ourselves, forcing people to stay much closer to script because there isn't enough time to edit.
To explore these other things.
I suppose my dream at the moment is to be able to make television that has a big enough budget to give us time. Time is the thing for me.
Yeah.
And time to experiment and time to explore. And fundamentally that feels like it's got to be a co-production. It feels like in order to have that kind of budget, one is going to have to be doing international projects.
Right.
So at the moment, I am exploring a project on a television series, or a series of television series on Shaka Zulu. And I'm very aware that the only way to make it is with international partners.
Yeah.
And I'm watching the product of all the potential partners, like the History Channel, and they did Roots, they did Vikings.
They did Book of Negroes as well, right? Or is that something?
I'm not sure that I think that was HBO.
Was it HBO? Oh, you might be right.
Yeah, but the point is that all of them are in the English language.
Yeah.
And that seems a very dismaying thought with Shaka Zulu. It just feels, well, you know, the original, the one that was made in the 80s was made in English.
It was, but again, it was a good show, I suppose, in some elements, but it took a lot away from it.
I think it'll take a huge amount away from it. So that's, you know, that feels like, again, a big challenge.
But what and you're right, and we see that. I mean, even when you turn on the TV, like I'm on record saying it, so I can't say anything else. I'm particularly not a fan because the caliber of work that, as the audience we get, is not really at that level where we actually could be. And I think we can put some of it on what you're saying, that there's so little turnaround time that you have to shoot in a month, in 2 months, whatever. So you don't have time to really explore and figure out how do we tell this thing, what's the real core of it. And like I have to, so ongoing question, like what is that on? Like who, what, not necessarily who, or what do we blame that on, or what do we credit that to? Because that speed of creating such large volumes, as you said, the price is the quality in some way, shape, or form.
You know, look, it's a thing of, it's money. And you know, there are so many competing channels now. You know, so I mean, just a few years back when we did Aspire, it felt like it was kind of the only show in town that was doing what it was doing.
It was.
But now there are many competing shows doing just that. And so that I think those budgets get thinned out, spread wide in order to make the volume of content that the audiences are demanding, or in this country. So in the rest of the world, people do co-productions. They look for the bigger audience and they do co-productions in order to find the scale of audience and the scale of money that the projects need. And here we're not able to do that. And given that, I think it's unbelievable what our crews achieve. Working in the conditions that they're working in and working as fast as they are working in. You know, I mean, many of the shows at the moment are being shot on location. You know, they're not sort of studio bound, one person talking to another, you know, in the sort of grand, bold and the beautiful kind of tradition. It's not that. It's like, there's action, there's
a lot of moving pieces in there.
It's often location material, and that's being achieved incredibly quickly. So I take my hat off to the crews and to the directors for what they do manage to do.
Right.
But you know, without the extra budget and the extra time, difficult to compete with what's out there. You know, Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones.
But what are we doing differently? Because if we take a show like Aspire, right, season 1, when it hit the ground, it was second to none. You couldn't match it. People were I wasn't even on it, and everybody I knew, they're like, "Yo, Isbai." And they talk about the characters, they really connect with it. So one would assume that if a show is that good and that impactful, then from the network, the next stage would be, we got to put more money into this thing so that it can grow, right? Because you've seen what it can do. So what are we then inverse? Because that's not the case.
Well, I mean, in the case of Aspire, I mean, MultiChoice is a business. And it's run ultimately by suits. And I think they are they look at the numbers. And so the people that we deal with, Julissa and, the commissioning editors and all of those people, they are working within a regime determined by the suits. And I think the suits are not that invested in local television. I mean, exactly. I would have thought, well, Isibaya in a way reinvented Mnet and reinvented Mzansi, certainly. It invented Mzansi in a way. It was able to, I think, position itself completely differently in terms of a black audience through that show, and then what came subsequent to that. So I was surprised that I would have thought, well, throw money at it.
Put more money into it, make it
but
grow.
No, so they're much more like, well, inflation is this this year 5% more, or 6% more.
Produce the same product.
And of course it gets harder. Isibaya was supposed to be one season,
right?
And that was the whole thought and the whole narrative arc. But because it was, it found such a big audience, the broadcaster was very reluctant to give up on it, and so then it's a second season and a third and a fourth, and to generate fresh story that the audience kind of demands is hard. It gets harder and harder.
That's the thing, and I was gonna go to that, the dangers of it, and I like the fact that you said it was supposed to be a one season thing, because we spoke with another industry friend, and we were playing with that idea of what would happen if we just put that new rule out that shows have to have a maximum, argument's sake, of 3 seasons, where it's a real concise story. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and it ends, as opposed to having an ongoing show where at a certain point you start seeing that, okay, they're running out of ideas, but they just need to keep going, and so you're just grasping at whatever you can now to keep the thing moving.
Well, I think it's the business head, and that is dictating that, and it's people are not being particularly adventurous. So I mean, if you think in Hollywood, the culture of sequels now, it's like that one worked, so we want to hold on to that, whatever it was that made it work, which I'm not a big fan. I loved Godfather 2.
Godfather.
But not 3.
I don't know. I'm still first one. 2 is good. I'm more first one.
Look, 1 is great. 2 is also great.
And this whole thing of the major films and revamping them into series. Because I think even on a global scale, that's like the new trend and it thing now. Like films that...
Like Fargo.
Yeah, the Fargo, Training Day, Lethal Weapon they did. So, right, like these massive ones, and then just take them, revamp them, put them into series.
Well, I mean, in a way, like the question that I'm always asked is, why don't you make a user feature film? For me, that series found its magic in that moment with those actors.
Let it live.
And for me, it tarnished like whatever it was that it had then. So I have no interest in doing that.
Yeah. That's dope. And like, because I really feel like, and I said this again like yesterday when we were texting, like it seems like we have more experts and less creatives calling the shots and at the helm of this thing, because we've seen it in so many cases where as a creative you come with this great whatever, a concept, this idea, this show, but because the people that are in positions to actually make it into something don't see it, or whatever, they don't want to see it, or they don't see it, or they don't want to put the money in, they would revamp and tarnish and strip out all the key elements that really make it an exceptional thing. And then it just conforms to what's already out there, because I suppose it's the safer thing. We already know what the audience wants.
Well, look, it's the difference between a great producer is going to put together the elements that make a great show. And a producer that is doing what you are describing is never going to pioneer anything. It's going to be more of the same. But there are great producers out there. And I think it's like, adventurous producers are.
It's not easy for those.
Yeah, it's a tough thing because media takes a lot of money to make. Television makes a lot of money, takes a lot of money. Features take a lot of money. So difficult to be adventurous with a lot of money, but that's what we need.
It's true. Do you still watch a lot of local content?
I'm ashamed to say I watch nothing at all. Nothing. And I'm very ashamed. But I watch nothing. My only comfort is that I'm not a big copier. It's not like I feel, well, the Queen's doing incredibly at the moment, so how can I make something like that? It's not my way in the world. I would rather find a new thought and strike out in a new direction. That's where I am.
I think that also helps, though, in a way, not being exposed to whatever is happening, so your mind isn't contaminated with what's happening here. You're just in your own ideas. But the reason why I asked that is I wanted to get your touch on what you think of the overall, let me say, narrative that's basically being advanced. Because like for me, I feel like a lot of these stories are the same. Like it's from the same.
Yeah, I mean, but that's also the demands of daily television. So, and the budget. So, if you have any sense at all, you will make a dynastic family story. Like the Queen, or like The Herd, or a whole lot of these shows, where it's a power struggle within a family.
It's true.
Because it's a very contained world. The audience is invested in the relationship dynamics. We all recognize father-daughter relationships and mother-son, whatever. It's recognizable, and it's a good environment to generate drama. So that's where television tends to go. So they are, crime families, or, that's, a little bit of violence, domestic, jealousies, and so it repeats itself. We're working on Istembiso at the moment, and the one thing that defines it outside of all of those is that there is a sort of a university, a university residence structure, which feels different to the other shows.
Yeah.
But the challenge is that when you do something like that, your cost gets much bigger.
Yeah.
And so you're spreading the story between many people, and you're also spreading the budget, between many
costs
people.
more,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if you've got a good business head, you would say no to a show like S01E03.
Yeah. But
And it's by as well. It's like much too big a landscape.
But I mean, we've seen that it works though. This is the thing. Like,
But it doesn't work economically.
but
Right.
in terms of making money.
Yeah.
Look at Game of Thrones again. We go back to that.
You can't rationalize like that.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones is operating in an entirely different realm.
Yeah. Okay.
It is reaching an audience, a scale of audience that
It's much
we
bigger than ours.
can't even dream of.
Yeah.
So in order to do something like a Shaka Zulu,
Yeah.
you've got to reach that audience. You've got to reach that scale of audience.
Yeah.
Because it's got to be made on a budget that is not entirely dissimilar. The point is that you're used to watching Game of Thrones. You're not gonna judge Shaka Zulu differently. You're gonna think, well, the battle should be as good as those in Game of Thrones or in Vikings.
True.
Whatever, it's so that's the challenge. And I mean, it's nice to have a challenge.
Yeah.
But what we don't want, what I certainly don't want to do is to deliver the kind of, they tried hard,
That's the worst.
No, that's out of the question.
That's
One wants to make something that is going to beat Game of Thrones at the Emmys or whatever. That's ideally what one should be aiming at.
Yeah, and we have that. I'm a firm believer in.
Well, look,
The stories.
I admire Game of Thrones, but I prefer the first 3 Lord of the Rings.
Never watched.
Okay, well, it's not a series, the films.
Yeah, never watched.
And those come out of New Zealand,
Yeah.
That comes out of a filmmaker in New Zealand, so no reason why we can't be doing it here.
For sure.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong if you have a different view. I think for the most part the West, right? You take the US and the British, they've had a healthy run of telling the stories, at being at the forefront of the industry, Hollywood and whatever. And in bluntly put, we haven't. So the stories of Africa that really have made it out of the continent are those that they, for the most part, chose to tell, like the story of Nelson Mandela, the story of apartheid, and so on and so forth. So for the most part, we are sitting on a chest of untold, unheard stories.
Yeah.
That we've never really been in a position to tell them ourselves in our way, like, because we know it's a different story when someone comes from Brian did with the Black Panther. You come and station yourself for 3 weeks, you study and research. That person has a very different understanding to a person that actually is from there. So why I put the question out about the content and for the most part being the same is because there's so many of those unseen and unsurfaced stories in the vault. Then how can we, or if possibly at all, those come out, and not even just from a perspective of, it's great stories, it's art, but even it's great business, because the world again is now, it's showing its appetite for that new alternative, that different type of Africa, right? This renaissance, if you call it, but like people like, there's a fascination with Africa that's there.
yeah, there's no doubt at this moment.
Yeah.
And it feels like a great moment to be making films here. Language is a thing.
Yeah.
You know, Black Panther is in English, essentially. And hard for me to imagine many of our narratives in English.
Yeah.
You know, it feels like you want to tell them in the language that they belong in.
Originally.
And that the actors are most comfortable in, you know. So that's a challenge. So in fact, you know, I would be interested in telling stories that are set in our future, which I would imagine, I imagine in the future in an urban context, English will have conquered in many ways, unfortunately. It's the dreadful thing about English, but and so I would believe in a future in which there's a lot of English spoken. It's difficult for me to believe in a past with a lot of English spoken, you know. So then I think, okay, well then, if I can believe in that, well then, let me explore a world in the future. You know, the other thing is like French cinema, German cinema, Australian cinema even, were propped up by governments. I mean, you know, in the sense that with very substantial government subsidies. You know, so that would be a way to get local language, you know, sort of on a kind of scale that, I mean, you'd never be able to make huge projects, but, you know, respectable, relatively big projects would be helped if there was a very active and a very active government component. But of course, then, you know, it's open to censorship and all that sort of thing, which
that's the worst thing.
And you know, the great thing about the American and the Indian and the Nigerian industries is that they've made it themselves. There've never been governments involved. But in each case, there are home audiences big enough to
get behind those things.
Well, also, to fund them. Well, I mean, look, the Nollywood model is a great model, but it's particular to Nollywood.
That's true.
And they make things on incredibly low budgets. But, you know, India is a huge industry, and Hollywood, of course, is Hollywood.
Yeah. We spoke about that, and it was actually pretty cool how Nollywood, how they did it. Because even when
Nollywood is very impressive.
They had this thing, even in South Africa, there was a phase where in every other household, it was an African magic thing. And it's funny because we'd always laugh, they talk funny, or they have terrible recording equipment and the sound is distorted and all of these things, but you'd always tune in and you were always watching.
Yeah, I mean, people all over Africa watch the Nollywood product. So they certainly got something right.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's brilliant what they did.
Yeah.
Let me ask you onto this one. And this is it's been a touched on thing. The opening of the industry. But for a second, I'm not particularly from the actor side, in terms of writers and directors and the people behind the scenes, that level of creators. Are we open? Is it?
Do you mean in terms of, is it still a white industry?
Well, that too. That too.
You know, we're not nearly as open as we should be, I don't think. and it's something that I don't know, I've been interested in for a long, long time. In the 80s, I was part of a film collective, and we had interns. In fact, my partner, Tebogo Moklatsi, I met him when he turned up as an intern in that collective. And then we connected. But it has felt very slow. But I'm constantly now seeing black talent in South Africa that stands pretty tall. And just in the context of social media, I think of like images that are being generated that are incredibly beautiful, and people building brands that are interesting and complex, and but there are far too few black DOPs out there, and I don't entirely understand why it's the case. And at the moment, if I look at our company, in fact, we just hired a white director, but on the whole, our directors are black and all very talented. And I don't want to turn everything into if a white person is very talented, then I'm interested. But
for sure.
But certainly in the context of telling black stories in a black world, the value of having people, one, that are interested in watching the narratives, and two, that have experienced much of what is being told is a huge value. And it's happening, but it's happening much too slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could it be that, or is it the size of our industry and our broadcasters? I mean, it's such an intimate number of them that there aren't really a wide range of options to take content and whatever to. If we say we have three main broadcasters, right? That's only three, and if they work in a state where it's pretty much like a monopoly of all the content that's out, the doors are very tightly shut to anyone new. It's kind of like, no, we'll work with the people that we already know. So you know what I mean?
Yeah. So that is the case. At the moment, probably every day I will receive some kind of person will mail me and say, this is who I am. I'm desperate for an opportunity as an actor or as this or that, or, whatever. And a lot of them seem really interesting, and I'm interested in their work. But in order to give them an opportunity, I either have to generate a new project, or I have to get rid of somebody. So it's a very hard thing. With actors, for example, in this industry, you have a sense that if you write them out of the show, you're taking them from a place where they have what they feel is a reliable income into a wasteland very often.
Yeah.
Because it's not like actors go from one job to another in this country.
It's true.
They lose a job, and then, boy, they're out there on their own. And, it's like, very often these are family, people with families that are, people that they support. And and there's a kind of a false security that you get in these long-running shows, and then you think, well,
you're good.
I'm secure. I can invest in that car, or I can invest in that house. And then suddenly something changes.
You get written out.
And so it's, I think, very hard before I would say to somebody, hey,
it's over.
It's over.
Yeah.
So that's a big factor. And, the big shock with Yizo was that it felt like such great actors emerged out of it, and so many of them after that did not get work.
Yeah.
It felt like we were the only company that made the kind of product that they were comfortable in or would get cast in. And in fact, that's why we did, it was one of the main impetuses behind doing Zone 14 was, I thought, well, I want to make a home for all this talent that's kind of not finding a place in what was then, Generations and Isidingo and all of that kind of product, which is all kind of went as aspirational television. And if you think back in those days, Generations was in English,
It was very Western.
It only after you saw that it start shifting into other languages. I stand to be corrected on that, but I think that's the case. So that was one of the reasons why we did Zone, was to make a home.
It worked. I have to give due credit to that. And even what's happening now with if we pull out Istembiso, because for me it's one of, in terms of the casting, one of the few, if not arguably the only, that really has opened, if I may, the door to new talent. That there's now this young face, and these are actually young people. You could see So I want to ask you then: is it? Have you seen or come across that conflict where you want to open the door to new creatives, but when they come in, the quality of their work, whether it's acting or writing, whatever, is not exactly par. So you're kind of faced with that challenge of, I want to get new guys, but the work that you're giving me is not enough to, meet a certain standard or whatever.
Well, look, there's talent and there's experience. I mean, they're two things. They're both valuable. But talent is an incredible thing. So I suppose, that's what you're really looking for. I mean, when we for Yizo 2 and 3, we were seeing like 1,000 people kind of thing, and certainly, I don't know how many people we saw for Istembiso. We did auditions.
Right.
So obviously you have an idea of who the characters are, and they have to be people that fit the needs of that character. But we look incredibly hard for somebody that feels like a diamond in the rough, I suppose. And so Nomzamo on Inspire, she never acted before. So there we took a big chance. But we certainly don't regret the gamble that we took. On Istembiso, the 2 young leads never acted at all. So we've gambled there, and there are very few gambles that I have regretted. They've all felt like calculated gambles. And certainly, and on Istembiso we have the fantastic situation of some truly astonishingly great actors that have been around for a long time, you know, like Hamilton and Mavuso and Ndie, and so they're pretty strict with the young new cast that are coming in. And that show, it's like they have clear ideas of what behavior should be on a set, and they express them. So it's a great learning curve for the young people.
I was going to say it feels like that.
Yeah,
the whole production feels like that. I want to say boot camp, but like that training ground.
Yeah.
That you come in, you get yourself the essentials, and then from there you're ready to play in the majors. Or was that the intent, the intention, or part of it?
I don't know. I mean, for me, always, the ideal is to have a combination of new, hungry talent,
yes,
and mature experience, and putting those two to rub up against each other.
That's true.
So I kind of have always wanted that and looked for that. So I'm always looking for a new face, or I mean, we just cast on Isabaya a person who was a writer with us.
Okay.
And she's a very talented writer, and I looked at him and I said, you should be an actor, because he's got such an interesting persona and such an interesting face. And like years later, he mailed me and he said, "You remember you said..."
I'm calling you on that one now.
So we gave him a sort of a short, small role on Istembiso to see whether he would cut it, and he did great. So now we're going to give him a substantial role on Isbaya.
Right.
He will be the new young chief.
Neat.
I mean, we've just cast on Istembiso a character called Heaven, a guy that's never had an opportunity before.
Right.
From Alex, yeah. And he brings like a whole life experience to the role, but he's never been on anything else,
Right.
And so for me, that's great. It's like
that's pretty cool.
It's great because it's a big opportunity for him. Same was with Zola,
Yeah.
Anizo too. He had been sitting around for ages. And then he got that opportunity, and he took hold of the opportunity. No doubt about it.
Worked out. That played out well.
Yeah. He was.
What's the interference, if involvement of? Because we know in SA, you take it to Mzansi Magic Mnet, they buy content, so they own it, right? So once that deal has been inked, how involved are they in the creation of it? Like, as the house, do you still maintain your creative freedom to take the story and tell it how you feel it needs to be told? Or
we've always been pretty lucky around those relationships. They've always been pretty supportive. We had disagreements on the road, in the casting, and I think in retrospect, I hope to think they thought that we were right. So on the whole, we are really supported. But I do think that we have a special, people have told me that as the company Bomb, we do have a special relationship. people tell us we get off easy.
Yeah,
But it's, it's because we have a depth of experience.
it's true. It's true. And I never told you this. I'm attesting to that. Even the first time I came here and started this whole thing, it was, okay, Bomb is the company that did Izo, did Zone 14, they did The Road, and Ismail and Stemmy's right. So I saw your name, and I'm thinking, okay, Angus Gibson, he's at the helm. You were a black guy to me. This is I don't know why, but in my mind it was like, okay, the work that's been put out, Angus Gibson is a black man. So when I met you, I'm like, he's white. In fact, on the phone when we spoke, like, wait, he's not black. And then I met you, like, oh, he's white. But there was that contrast again, like the image of the real you is totally different from the pedigree of work that's on the floor. And it really is then it's like, it was that interesting dynamic of, okay, why, what is happening, or in it, what, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was a cool, interesting thing to kind of go, because you'd expect
Yeah,
that
you would.
it would. Are you attracted to that type of stories, or is there a reason why? Because I feel like there's a common thread from the first one up until the shows that are airing now.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very divided society. I mean, I was the perfect kind of apartheid product in a sense. I mean, I was entering school when apartheid was at its, most powerful. So, and I had so my intention always in the beginning, as I grew up, was to leave the country. Europe, America, that's where my life will be, not in this country.
Gotcha.
And through strange circumstance, I found myself living in a black community for a period when I was sort of just at the end of my adolescence, and curiously I felt like there's something there's an aesthetic that I like. I mean, it wasn't like a do-gooder thing. It was like, it has nothing to do with like me having a sort of a missionary position. Like, it was like, I just was more interested in that part of South Africa. And then, if you are wanting to, there was a point in my life where I really had the opportunity to be abroad and to have a career abroad. And it was clear for me that I did not want that. I wanted to be back in South Africa. And if you are in South Africa making product for a South African audience, it's a black audience. And so it makes,
just worked out.
So it's a combination of factors. And I often think, it's so many years back there was a thing called the Black Achiever Award or something.
Oh, yeah.
And I was nominated for Black Achiever, and I phoned them and I said, you know that I'm not black, right? So they said, yeah, no, we do know. So it was Teboko and myself that had been nominated. So I said, well, Teboko was black, but I'm not. So they said, well, no, we know that, and then eventually they came back and they said, no, maybe it's better if Teboko gets it. So I didn't get the Black Achiever Award. But I scraped close.
Had you not made that call, you might have.
No, I mean, you could accuse me of being a voyeur, and probably rightly so. I don't know. I've just read a book that I really like, and I would like to turn into a mini-series, and most of the characters are white, actually. So
South African story, or
it's set turn of the century, like 1899,
right.
1900, the time of the just before the war, and it's a narrative that I really like. So
That's
maybe up ahead,
Yeah.
there's
balance it out with that.
yeah.
Nice. Okay, let me see for the final leg of it. If taking where we are now, like as an industry, television and film, but more specifically with television, moving forward, is similar to the first question I put out. Like, are we on track to where we need to go? Because I have my views and my ideas of it, and I'm especially people in your position, people that are creatives, people that create content. I'm always interested in hearing where each individual stands and how they view it. Like, in moving forward, like is there a cliff that we're walking to and we just don't get it, or are we going to take flight soon?
Well, I mean, there is a great liberation in the technology that we have nowadays.
Yeah.
So, it's possible to make a feature film on an iPhone, and that excites me. I think that if you're exploring, it's liberating. If you make something on nothing, then you can do
Anything.
kind of what you want to do in a sense. I mean, obviously,
Within
there are,
reason, but
I mean, there was this young filmmaker in KZN that, for the longest time, I funded all his films.
Wow.
But they never cost more than 1,000 rand, and he would make he'd make like a whole feature film.
Less than 1,000.
Yeah. So, and he was incredible, and these films that arrive on my doorstep, he'd make the soundtrack, everything, subtitle it, and some of them were great.
Some.
So that's exciting. So I suppose experimentation is something that feels like a great thing to do. It's very important.
Yeah.
Because if we don't experiment, then we're going to just repeat what we're doing.
Right.
And I kind of feel like it's either with a very big budget or with a very small budget that you can experiment.
Yeah, middle budget is safe.
The middle budget, it's hard. It's hard to get that space.
Yeah.
So I'm for the big and the small. Yeah.
There's no.
Well, look, anything is possible, but I do think, a person I've known all his life is Sibusiso Shongwe, who made Necktie Youth. And, he started out literally, with that film on the weekends. He would shoot a scene, and he has a very good eye, and he was exploring a world which was of kind of relatively spoiled suburban kids, which felt like a fresh world to explore, which is, I think he thinks of as was his own world. And the film is not flawless, but it is full of, there is a fresh thought there. It's something completely new to respond to.
Yes.
And the world out there responded to that. It's clear, people recognized this was a new voice, despite the fact it had been made on the weekends with borrowed cameras and,
right.
And so I celebrate that, I celebrate Godfrey making his films on 1,000 rand. You know, it's like.
I think that's basically the heart of it, though.
Yeah.
Although I just think as an industry we don't see it, you know.
Yeah.
But like the creative, because I'd always, even so, I you have to and respect that the level of artistry or creativeness that you can have when you have minimal resources, it's unrivaled. And I think this could just be my own opinion, but the world, again, they're seeing that it's now taking the front row seat, where it's no longer necessarily about the biggest budget, but like, are you creating something dope? Is it interesting? Is it engaging? Does it connect with the audience? And I just feel like as an industry, instead of looking at that and investing and channeling in that, we're kind of just holding on to the traditional perspective and like, no, you need this budget and then we'll do it in this way. So we kind of just limit it for those that think out of the box, that don't necessarily just think for the confines of the country, but I'm just like thinking, no, this would be dope content anywhere in the world.
Yeah. That's right. Look, I have a distinct memory of seeing the trailer for She's Gotta Have It.
Oh.
And I was in London at the time, and I watched it and I thought, oh my God. And it opened at the Gate Cinema in Notting Hill the next week.
Right.
And I was there opening night. And in that moment, you know, Spike's film it opened up a whole new thing. You know, It was like a whole new world had been opened up. And you might look at that film now and think, oh, well, it's rough, and in fact it's sexist, or whatever.
But at that time.
But in that moment, it was an incredible thing. And, you know, he is a pioneer. I mean, he's always been a pioneer. He's like out there.
His catalog is ridiculous.
Fighting to do things on his own terms. And I admire that.
Yeah. No, he's an icon for sure. That's one for the culture. Oh, okay. So that was. I wanted to get.
And hang on, but
Yeah.
She's Gotta Have It was made, like, you know, in the it was made on nothing. Like, he had sort of borrowed a whole lot of money from a whole lot of people. So, you know, that's what I'm getting at is.
He's dope. I saw an interview where he was talking about the first camera he owned as well. Like, somebody just gave it to him. It was coincidental, well, not coincidence, but it was just a random thing, and he just started documenting and filming. And I think there are a lot of creatives, again, even in South Africa, that do that. But it's a very sensitive industry, because you give so much of, like, the work that you create is so emotional and you're so invested in it, that if you take it to anyone and they say no, it's very hard to not take that personally, right? And to pull yourself up and then, okay, I'm gonna go try another door. I'm gonna persist and do that. It's not an easy thing, especially if you're in an industry where you feel like they just don't get it. They're not even interested in listening to that. They just want you to replicate what's already there, that safe option, and then, you know, then you can be let inside the door and sit with everybody else. But I personally, I think it's a problem that in due time is going to show its full wrath on us if we're not careful on it now, because again, the future and the next phase of this whole thing is in, like, what's that gift of discovery, that new thing. So this clogging onto what's already out, and like as the safe bet, as we just spoke about, the budgets and all of that, it's not a long-term thing. I'd put it, it's alarming. I'd put it in my view. You know.
Well, there's a lot of talent out there, and so I'm, waiting for the next revelation. Yeah,
it's gonna show itself.
Yeah.
Without question.
Yeah.
Yeah.